it's kind of a it's kind of a crucial thing, that whole relationship between the individual and their sense of identity. And most people have their sense of who they are is an accretion that's acquired by external sources. So our sense of identity is forged from our parents, from our family, like genetically and physically, like our physical bodies. I mean, everybody's physical body will in some way resemble the physicality of the parents just by simple mechanisms of genetics and in that kind of inheritance. If you've got hair color, eye color, body shape, body size, body markings, whether it's moles or freckles or whatever, that will be something that's reflected from the genetics. And so there are certain things in the hand which are purely genetic and will reflect the genetics of that individual. So that's one of our external sources, should we say, for our sense of identity. It comes from the physicality of the environment that we're born into by virtue of the genetics of our parents. But then once you've got that situation, then there's the acquisition of language, which is very, very important of the creation of sense of self-identity. And your identity will be very strongly affected by the language structures that you're involved in, the cultural milieu that you're involved in, the ideas that are prevalent within that particular society, the philosophies, the religious values. Because language is always an articulation of those kind of ways of apprehending the world. And that whole way of apprehending the world creates a worldview. So we inherit language and we inherit language structures. And a part of that also, therefore, we inherit and imbibe from other people the environment, whether it's sociological or whether it's economic, kind of classes that we go to, the kind of school we go to, the kind of people we hang out with. And so most people come into adulthood having been this sponge and having absorbed all this stuff from the external world about how they're supposed to be, how they're supposed to dress, what kind of skills they need to get, what kind of orientations they should have, what kind of jobs they should do, what kind of values they should hold, and so on and so forth. And so part of the creation of that identity is this sort of taking in of things from the external environment. And I'm not saying there's anything wrong with that, because there's a necessity to be a human being that lives in relationship to the culture and environment around you. But if there's not been really good listening by the parents, if there's not been really good listening by the school, if there's not been an adaptation of all that teaching towards the individual that actually reflects the nature of that individual, then what happens is people will end up with a sense of their identity that's completely different from who they are. And so one of the things that we're actually doing when we're coming to hand reading is we're looking at who you are without all that accretion. And that's what's extraordinary about hand reading. And that's exactly what, and I know from talking with you when I looked at your hands, Sabrina, it was mainly on the fingerprint patterns. And that's exactly why the fingerprint patterns are so important. The fingerprint patterns, as we know, are unique to every individual. Not every individual has their own set of fingerprints. Not even identical twins have identical fingerprints. They all have unique fingerprint patterns. And there's something that don't change over time. The fingerprint patterns are very much the expression of our identity. And if there's been good parenting, and if you're an astrologer, you'll know the same thing. If you can see the talents or abilities in a person because you can look at their chart, you can actually then encourage that child to learn certain kinds of things or develop certain kind of skills in reflection to what they are naturally, rather than doing a one-size-fits-all education system, which is what we have in school. Mass-produced education will produce mass-produced people, and that won't make people happy. That will work in a generic way, but it works to the advantage of society. If you want more engineers, you make people do mathematics and chemistry and physics. If you want lots of artists, you put lots of money in art and theatre and music. And so there's always an argument about, how you create the society by the emphasis you put in the education system, which is obviously the question of funding. And those are external reasons to do those things. But you can't make a ballerina into an engineer if she doesn't have that skill set to do that, or vice versa. You can't make an engineer into a dancer. They don't have that body shape and so on. So the question then is always about helping people find out who they are. And unfortunately, most people's sense of their own identity is not based upon their own experience of themselves. They don't have an experience of themselves. They don't even know.
Totally external.
They don't know what an experience is, or they don't know how experience is created, or they don't know how their sense of identity is created. So there's no questioning about that, how that process happens. And one of the most profound things about hand reading is you're enabling people to see themselves as they are. And that is absolutely universally the most common thing that people will say after they've had a hand reading is like, oh my God, I feel seen. Oh my God, I feel like someone actually gets me. Oh my God, I feel understood. Now I know who I really am. It helped me see myself more clearly. And that doesn't really matter about the age, Kerry. And it's obviously that's more powerful to a 20-year-old, but it can be equally powerful for a 60-year-old because like, oh my God, somebody can actually see me after all these years. Oh my God, and that's there's a potency in that which is valuable irrespective of your age. And what there's a kind of that authentic, because what that leads to is an authentic relationship. And as a hand reader, you have this extraordinary ability to create this space where you can actually have an authentic engagement with the kind of core of what a person is. And for many people, that can be an extraordinarily liberating experience in the complete flintlock kind of way, Sabrina. Like you're taking away all those locks, all those inhibitions. You're actually helping people see themselves as they are. Now, that doesn't mean they exist in the vacuum and they can't interact with society. You've got to work out how to make those two work together again. But you're changing the script and you're basically saying you can now interact with society coming from you rather than all this stuff coming inward. Like it's like, what do you hear in your core and what can you bring out? The true meaning of the word education, does anybody know? It comes from the Latin educare. So educare or duce means leader, like Mussolini was called il duce, to lead out. So education means to lead out. It doesn't mean to pour in or thrust in or fill up with facts. It means completely the opposite of that. It means connecting with that person and bringing them out. You're leading them out. It's like, so the whole emphasis on chirology, on hand reading, is about trying to help a person center themselves within themselves so they can bring themselves out. And that's education. And what we're doing in hand reading is reversing that process entirely, reversing that process that of education in the sense of the schooling where they're throwing stuff into you. And that's going to be absolutely true for this course as well. It's like, so Melissa, if you just sit there listening for me for 7 weeks to me, you're going to be in exactly the same position you are now as you were a year ago, and will be in the same 5 years. It's not about you sitting there receiving all this information. It's about you taking it on and bringing it in and bringing it out. All right. So that's what you've got to do. It's like it's a two-way thing, but it starts from that self-recognition, and that recognition is about sitting within yourself. And sitting within yourself is about bringing that information out. And bringing that information out is about you having the courage to do that, to shine, to be the shining being that you are. Now, it's an interesting fact is that many people are really afraid to have their hands read. It's an extraordinary thing. I mean, I go to lots of fairs and lots of markets. I've toured the entire New Zealand with the extravaganza fair. And you get this phenomenon, and people go, and they go, oh, it's hand reading. I say, yeah. And they say, it's about, would you tell me my future? And I go, no, it's not about that. It's about self-knowledge and self-awareness. And they go, oh, why would I want to know that? Oh, I don't want to know that. I want to know my future. I want you to predict my future for me. It's like, well, I don't do that. And anyway, you can't do that. And it's like, and it was kind of like, it was a really interesting revelation. I got to this market and I thought, why am I sitting here? The tarot readers, there's about 6 tarot readers in this room, and they're all busy all day. They see like 20 people in a day, and there's me, I do 2 hand readings in an afternoon. And it's like, what's going on? And it's like, and then I thought about it, and I thought, where we were in Te Atatu in Auckland, which is a pretty bogan area of Auckland. Mm-hmm. And it suddenly occurred to me why this was happening. And what occurred to me was these people are economically and socially disempowered people. So their view on life is that life happens to them. Mm. So they want to go to a tarot reader because they want to know what's going to happen to them, because they don't have any agency in their life. They don't have any agency economically. They don't have any agency sociologically. They don't have any psychological agency. They don't have any sense of their own identity. They don't have a sense of who they are. So they don't have any sense they have any control over their life. Life just happens to them. And if you're poor black female, living in a damp house in rental accommodation in Mangere Bridge or something like that, you've got everything fucking stacked against you. Life happens to you. You don't have that sense of agency within the world to actually make a difference in your life. So coming to someone like me and say, yeah, you can take charge of your life, you can make your life go the way you go. No, it doesn't make any sense. No, I want to know if I'm going to win the lottery, because if I win the lottery, then it's all sorted, isn't it? You know. So they kind of had this. So the tarot readers were really, really busy, because what do they tell them? They tell them what's going to happen. You know, oh, let me just do the future for you. Let's see the cards. Here we go. Yes, it's all going to pan out like this. And then you see them coming every week, and people come every week to the tarot readers, or they'll go to a thing like that and they'll go to 4 tarot readers and a psychic as well, you know, just for a good measure, because they want to know what's going to happen to them, and they want to know what's going to happen to them because of a like of their agents. And so one of the biggest troubles I have as a hand reader is going to people, well, it's not like that. It's about you taking responsibility, and that's what happens when you have knowledge, Sabrina. And you'll have this true with your patients as well. Once you've helped your patients come to heal themselves, they have to take responsibility for it. They can't keep walking around the way, and they can't keep walking around the way they were and eating all the shit food that they were eating. They had to start taking responsibility, and they may or may not want to. And if they don't want to, they'll just keep coming back to you, and eventually you'll say, "Look, it's all right, you keep coming back to me, but if you keep coming back to me, the same problem's going to carry on." You know, and it's very nice you're having a nice massage, and I'm sure you feel much better. But why don't you actually do something that actually makes your life better? And there's an inbuilt resistance to people to taking responsibility for their lives and working with these things, because that requires effort and that requires hard work. And what I've just described to you there, Kate, is essentially the difference between palmistry and chirology. Okay, so that's the long answer to that question. That's exactly what it is. Because what palmistry does, it basically says your hand is fixed, the lines are fixed, and we can predict what's going to happen to you. So people come to me as they say, "Oh, you do palmistry? Oh, what's going to happen to me? Can you tell me my future?" It's like, no, I don't do that. You know, so what we're doing is completely opposite. What they're wanting is to replicate themselves within the context of a socio-economic structure where they are sheep or slaves or disempowered in whatever way they are within that socio-economic system. And hand reading is about liberating yourself from the confines of those particular paradigms. And if you look at now, it should be obvious why I got you to read the history. All right, okay, because that's exactly the difference between feudal society and contemporary society. In feudal, I mean, probably actually not that much different, but in feudal society, it was much more obvious that people's lives were very controlled by external forces, mainly the Roman Catholic Church. And the Roman Catholic Church was the dominant political and economic structure in Europe till at least the 16th century. Then you've got all the kings and all the political organizations around that, and the lords. And if you were a serf, you were born a serf, and you're going to die a serf. And there was no social mobility. You had no choice in the matter. And if you were lucky, you might have made it to the age of 30. Life was nasty, brutal. So I always like to ask this question: who knows their Shakespeare? How old was Juliet in the play Romeo and Juliet by Julius Caesar, by William Shakespeare?
At a guess, like 13.
No, 14. You're absolutely right. 14. So the play opens, the opening scene of the play is dad goes into daughter's room. Right, it's your 14th birthday today. We better get you married. And that's the opening line of the play. So that's basically what if you're 14, you're a young woman. Once you started menstruating, you're of childbearing age. Basically, you got to get married. I mean, so that's the reason why marriage was so young, as we call it now. But in those days, 12, 13, 14 was quite normal to go and get married, because that's when puberty hits. So that's when you become a woman. You're no longer a child. But if you think about it, if your life expectancy is 30 years, you better start reproducing at 13 or 14. Otherwise, you're not going to reproduce the generation. So that's kind of like an imperative. That's not kind of pedophilia or anything. That's just like biological necessity, to get through the next generation of people. And I think when people realize that, it's like, that's quite shocking. But the whole story, the whole purpose of a female woman in that society was your only value was your reproductive capability. That's it. And so therefore, of course, it's really important to know, how many children am I going to have? Am I going to get married? I mean, economically, even in Pride and Prejudice, who knows the Jane Austen novel, Pride and Prejudice? I mean, it's the same story. That's set in the 18th century. early 19th century. That's like there's a widowed woman, she's got three daughters, and if she doesn't get them married, they're all going to be in the poorhouse, and that's it. Their life will be destroyed. So she's got to get her three daughters married. That's basically the story, because economically they couldn't work, or they'd be in the poorhouse. If they were going to have any kind of life at all, the only way they could do that was to get married. And that's the economic reality for women, probably in some countries, probably still even now, but certainly in European countries, probably until the 1950s. Second World War did the biggest gave the biggest opportunity for liberation for women, simply because all the men were off fighting, so the women had to go and work in the factory. But that's an economic problem. That's an economic issue. But if you think about it, those are the preoccupations of medieval palmists. How long am I going to live? If life is nasty, brutal, and short, and you're likely to die by the age of 30, it's quite good to know. Or at least that's why you'd be concerned about it. Has anybody heard of the Black Plague or the Black Death?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yeah, you know what that is? Do you know how often that happens, Eric?
No, don't know.
Because we always hear in the history books that it happened in 1665, and then in 1666 was the Great Fire of London, and it burnt the whole London down and stopped the plague. But do you know how often it happened?
No.
Every year, apart from about 13, I think, for 150 years. It wasn't a one-off thing. It was every summer. The entire Europe was basically had the plague, and lots. I mean, if you look at a population curve of the world, it kind of goes up like that. The only time it goes down is in the 14th, 15th century, like that. The gradual population curve, because it decimated something like 40% of the European population was killed by the plague over that time. It was absolutely huge, and the reason and so it's not just a one-off thing. Like every summer, pretty much, you're going to get the plague was going to come and people were going to die. So death was everywhere. Death in childbirth. One of the classic formations you read in palmistry books is, if your waterline goes up between these fingers here, it means you're going to die in childbirth. Mm-hmm. It's kind of like, that's clearly. I mean, that's still clearly it can be an issue even today. It's not impossible for women to die in childbirth, even with today's medical intervention. But back then, that was a very real thing. If you have a breech birth, you may die. So, and the other thing I had to and if you heard of the 100 Years' War, God, you lot on your history, you're terrible. Okay, the 100 Years' War was a war between the English and the French. And do you know how long it went on for?
100 years?
No, 125 years. It wasn't even 100 years, more than 100 years. And again, it was like every summer, the English armies would go, right, we're going to go to France, we're going to kill the French. And the French would go, right, we're going to fight the English. Battle of Agincourt, all that sort of thing. So you got this whole scenario where you've got women trying to get married, or they're going to die in childbirth. There's men going to get killed because they get recruited into the army, and they're going to die by a wound to the head, or die from falling off a horse, or something like that. And these are all literally markings that are in the medieval palmistry text that tell you how you're going to die, or you're going to die of the bloody flux, which is a kind of a euphemism for the plague. So it's like there's kind of like that was the preoccupation. Life was nasty, brutal, and short, and so people were very concerned about how long they were going to live. But the reason they had a concern about all that is because they had no agency. And it's fascinating that most people today have a view of hand reading based upon how people saw hand reading, how hand reading was in the 15th century. So most people's view of palmistry is 500 years out of date. And for all those reasons, Kate, we don't use the word palmistry, okay? Or shemafat, okay? It's not palmistry. And as soon as you say palmistry, that's what's conjured up to people. They kind of this notion of your fate, your prediction, how long you're going to live, whether you're going to get married, how many tall, dark strangers are going to make you pregnant, how many babies you're going to have. It's like, and it's an extraordinary thing, and you will encounter this all the time. But the resistance to recognizing chirology as a powerful psychological tool is the same resistance as to why people don't do psychotherapy, or why people go to tarot readers, or why people buy the lottery tickets. because of their sense of their own disempowerment. And why do they feel disempowered? They feel disempowered because they live in a socioeconomic system that disempowers them. They live in an education system that fills their heads up and doesn't actually bring anything out of them, but fills them with, gladiators in the arena, or, reality TV shows, or TikTok, whatever bullshit is happening, whatever contemporary culture is coming at you. It's like filling stuff up. So people are consumers, not creators. And one of the tasks of chirology is to enable people to live a life that is creative, expressive, and fulfilling. So they're not consumers, they are creators. But that means turning this process around. And that means taking their sense of identity into their core of their being, so that people can sit within the core of their being and then move in life from that space. And that is incredibly liberating. And that's the purpose of hand reading. That's the whole point of reading hands, and why we do it, is to enable people to kind of come to that point of sort of self-discovery and self-liberation, so their life is an expression of who they are, not just a conformity to external social conditions that are making them be like they're supposed to be. It's like getting rid of the external story and being centered with themselves. So as you said, Sabrina, it's taking away all the layers of bullshit.
Yeah,
and
can I jump in quickly?
Nearly one more minute. And that layers of bullshit is also taking away trauma and other things that are being there to help people kind of manage their life, but things that are blocking them from being a true expression of who they are and where they want to go in their life. And that's what we're doing in chirology.
And that's what I was going to say before.